Let's read this together. Do not, or don't, store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body, and if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So, if the light within you is darkness, how deep is that darkness? No one can serve two masters, since either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. All right. You can see the picture up there, and I'm gonna go back to the title slide for a second so that you can see a little bit more easily. I'm fascinated by things like this, and one of the things that I follow on Instagram is, a lot of you have probably heard of there's a TV show. I've been following them since they were just an Instagram account, Cheap Old Houses, and they will show houses in various states of repair or disrepair. They can be all over the map. But sometimes the houses almost look like this, and it'll just say, please save this house. Somebody save this house. And every time I see one, I think of an old movie. Maybe y'all remember this, called Money Pit. Did anybody ever see Money Pit? If you were born after 1990, you probably did not see Money Pit. But I think about that one all the time. And frankly, that movie has probably saved Tanya and I a lot of heartache over the years, because I love old houses and I love the idea of fixing one of those up. But scenes from this movie, and especially the scene where the entire staircase in the foyer of this big old home just caves right into the basement, that kind of always goes through my mind, and then good reason comes back into focus, and you say, maybe somebody else should do that, but not me, right? Because you may be able to find some things. You can find some great bargains. Upstate New York, there are a lot of small towns, and people don't move to small towns. They all move to New York City, right? So in those small towns are old houses from the 1890s. They're 3 stories plus a basement and an attic. They can be Victorian, they can be Palladian, they can be all these different kinds of homes, really cool Greek revival houses. And they might be $115,000. And you can't even buy a new mobile home in early Texas for $115,000. And yet, there it is. And you think, that would have been cool, wouldn't it? Somebody's going to have a fun time fixing that up. But that $115,000 might be 1.5 million by the time you're finished. And it just can be an absolute sinkhole of a job. It's sad to me, because every time I see those, I wonder what happened. Like somebody 100 years ago moved into that house that's in the picture behind me. They moved in that house, and that was the pride of their life. They worked hard. No telling who that was or what, but obviously they had a good-sized family, I would think. Lots of kids running around, evenings on the porch, like Andy Griffith with a guitar. It seems like that would have been a wonderful life. And yet, if you drive by this house, wherever that is today, there's one just outside of town here that's the same way. And as long as we've lived in the house out here between Early and Zephyr where we live, I like to go the back way a lot of times. And on that back way is an old house. It's quickly becoming this. The first time we ever drove past it, Ellie was like, I would like to get that and fix that up someday. And now when we go by, I think she's reconsidered, am I right? It's like really, really bad. It's starting to look like this. Half the time the door is just flapping in the wind, really, really bad. And yet that house too was once someone's pride and joy. Maybe they built a wonderful life there, but whatever happened, it all turned to dust. And that's our passage this morning. As we look at Matthew chapter 6, he reminds us the things that you put your sense of worth in and your sense of value. I'm going to show one more here too. Sense of worth in, a lot of times are not the things that are actually going to matter. I'm a bit of a car nut. You might have noticed that already. The other picture there is of a Rolls Royce. A preacher doesn't need a Rolls Royce. You can go buy a Rolls Royce cheaper than you can buy a used Tahoe every day of the week. You can't afford to fix that car when it breaks, but you can afford to buy it. Most of them then, because of that high cost of repair, they end up looking like this. It's sad and terrible. The other day, there was a dealer. It has like 10 old Rolls Royces that don't start out in L.A., old movie stars' cars and producers' cars and stuff like that. Some of those cars are only $7,000, and they look absolutely wonderful, but it's a $7,000 yard ornament, right? Just terrible. All that money, all that pride, significance that comes with driving a Rolls Royce down the street. People, when you get your Rolls Royce, I bet you don't stand the same way as when you traded in your Chevy Vega. You think? It's kind of like when a man puts on a suit. Men put on a suit, and did you know that women don't know this, but suits actually come with a built-in air pump so that you can pump yourself up and stand the way you're supposed to stand in a suit. Y'all didn't know that, but that's back in there, and we just squeeze that thing and just look at that, Some of them come with a vacuum, and suck in your gut. They do that. I think these days there may be more men wearing girdles than women. I think that's the way that goes. That has much room for jokes, but we will not go there. But these things give us pride, and they make us stand differently, talk differently, walk differently, treat people differently, don't they? And some of us may have we may have never had a Rolls or a Bentley or a Jag, but we may have even just bought a new Suburban, and suddenly you feel like, okay, now I'm at a different level than I was at last week. And of course, as Christians, we know that's all empty nonsense and foolishness, or at least we should. Sometimes we participate as though we don't know that, but we should, because it's all garbage. And it really is garbage. Paul will actually use the word that it's all dung, just a manure pile. That's what it all comes to. That's even stronger than what Jesus says here, although Jesus uses the same term at other times. We have to put our eyes where they belong, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So what does it mean when he says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, thieves break in and steal? Don't do that. What does he mean by don't store up your treasures? And our first inclination is just to say, well, don't have stuff. Don't buy a Rolls, don't buy a car, don't buy a Cadillac, don't buy a bigger house, but that's not really exactly true. A car is a car, a house is a house, things are things. Whether or not they are moral or immoral depends on our heart and our mindset and what it is that we are projecting onto those things, or what we are drawing out from our perception of those things. But things, period, it's really not it. We kind of miss the point a little bit on that. So I want to go first through some things that he's not saying. First, does it mean that it's wrong for us to save up? If I'm not to store up my treasures on earth, well, then I shouldn't be saving things. I shouldn't even maybe if I really had faith, I wouldn't even have a savings account. Is that what it means to be a Christian? No safety nets? No, we'll look at a passage here in a second. But no. Does it mean that it's wrong to enjoy the fruit of your labor? Is it wrong for you to, maybe you got a raise at work this week and you took your family out to eat because you got that raise? Is that wrong? No, not necessarily. That would depend. If it was irresponsible, it might be wrong. If it was a total waste, it might be wrong. But no, I mean, you may have people who judge you, but Jesus is going to talk to them in the next chapter. In fact, it's right there on what you ought to think about what other people's purchases and ideas are. But no, is it wrong to enjoy God's provision and blessing? Well, that just seems like nonsense on the face of it, doesn't it? Let's look at why. First, he tells us in Proverbs chapter 6, I want you to pay attention to the ants. You ever do that? I do. I like to pay attention to ants. I don't just sit out in my backyard and look at them. I've got some that I've actually got to deal with. And if they're fire ants, they're not the ants that I think he's talking about. Those are enemy number one at my house. But look at the ants. And I like how he said, look at the ants, you slacker. But look at them. Look at the way that they do things. And ants, there are more lessons than this from ants. But the one he wants us to catch is this. When you look at ants, what are they always busy doing? You see them going in and out of that hole, and they come out empty, I'm going to say handed, though no hands, but they come out empty-handed. They come back, and they got stuff sometimes 6 times, 10 times bigger than themselves, taking it back into their burrow. Why are they doing that? They're saving up for what's coming. Ants prepare. Ants responsibly save. Ants keep that all organized and the way it ought to be for the greater good of their community. Now, that's probably an interesting little thing that I just added on there, isn't it? For the greater good of their community, not just for themselves. Among ants, there is no individual greed. There is only taking care of the greater community. And if you think that I'm quoting Karl Marx, you have missed Christianity altogether, right? Because he's only taking a warped version of what Christianity already taught us. And he warps it and makes it not work. But in Christianity, our faith is supposed to lead us to think beyond the end of our own nose, that it's never just about ourselves, and that it's always about how can God use what he's blessed me with for the sake of others. Okay? So, is it wrong to save? Is it wrong to make sure that you have a future and that you're taking care of your family? No. In fact, he says you need to think about that. You need to work hard. When he talks about the Proverbs woman in Proverbs 31, what is she doing? That very thing. She is providing, but she's also saving and she's investing in the future. She's buying and selling land, it says. Hardly are people, it's not unusual at all for women to be in real estate. That's normal for us, but we think it wasn't back then. But actually it was. It says the Proverbs 31 woman was buying and selling land. And what was that for? To provide for her family. She talks about her when she's sewing clothes for her family. Why? So that they won't be cold in winter. So she's always thinking ahead. It's a godly thing to think ahead and to prepare as best you can for what might be in your future. We can't predict everything, but we can be well prepared. And that's not only not wrong, it's a godly thing he tells us that we ought to be doing. Consider the ant. They get ready, don't they? In 1 Timothy, Paul writes to Timothy, chapter 6, verse 17, and he says, instruct those who are rich in the present age not to be arrogant or to set their hope on the uncertainty of wealth. Now, just a second, let's do a little side thing because it's important in the text and it speaks to Matthew 6. He does not say to Timothy, instruct those who are rich that they are wrong to be so. He doesn't say that. He doesn't tell them they have to get rid of it all. What does he say? Don't be arrogant, because wealth, and you don't have to be considered rich in America to have a lot of wealth. Most of us are wealthy compared to the rest of the world. We know that. Remind them not to be arrogant, because it is so easy. You don't even have to be middle class in the U.S. for you to get an arrogant attitude about people who are poorer or worse off than you. Well, I deserve what I got, and they deserve what they got. Listen, if you think every person who is in poverty got there just because they made horrible mistakes and are getting what they deserve, you are a hard-hearted curmudgeon who does not know Jesus. Because many people end up where they are by circumstances decided by other people. Ask anybody whose retirement was in an Enron investment. Ask anybody who has ever been fired while they were vulnerable and then unable to get work again. There are people in this world who have done everything right and are broke as all get out. And the last thing they need is a snotty Christian looking down on them and being hard-hearted about it, right? So he says, you remind the people who do have what they need, don't you get arrogant. Do not do it. And do not think that that money is your hope. It is not. Don't set your hope on the uncertainty of wealth, but on whom? On God, who richly provides us with all things. Now catch this, with all things to enjoy. You don't have to feel guilty because God has blessed you, okay? But you do need to have the right attitude about the things with which God has blessed you, okay? Our attitude and our heart, it really does matter. How do we see what we have, and how do we see ourselves because of what we have? And he reminds us, you need to stay humble, you need to stay generous, and you need to thank God. He gave it to you to enjoy it. So is it wrong to enjoy the fruit of your labor? In fact, no. Paul says, what's one of the reasons he gave it to you? He actually wants you to look at the things that you have earned through your hard work and turn that into songs of praise to God and enjoy it. You know, one of the ways that they tithed in the Old Testament was to have a party at the temple. In the book of Deuteronomy, he's giving them instructions about how to celebrate with a tithe. And we don't think of tithing as celebration, but tithing was celebration. That first best tenth of your goods given at the temple was meant as a praise to the Lord for all of the good that he has done. And good night, 90% of it was still at home. That's really pretty generous. You get to keep 90%. And so when you go, he gives them instructions. He says, you bring the best of your flock, you bring the best of your crop, and you bring that to Jerusalem. But he says, there is a concession. Maybe you live a long ways out. Maybe you're 300 miles from Jerusalem, and bringing your best lamb to Jerusalem is maybe not the easiest thing to do. Maybe by the time you get to Jerusalem, your best lamb is looking like slough-off lamb over here, worn out and exhausted and skinnied up from the journey. So in that case, what you do is you sell it at home. And you take the money that you get from that sell, and that becomes your tithe. But you don't just bring it to Jerusalem and pay it at the temple. No, he had better plan than that. He says, I want you to come to the temple, and I want you to buy groceries. I want you to plan a big meal, and I want you to go and get all the foods that you like. God particularly seems to like, in the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Leviticus, brisket. So God, Jews, and Texans, Anthony Bourdain used to say, are the only people who really understand the glory of brisket. But maybe you get brisket, you bring that to the temple. So you got your big brisket feast, and he tells them, get brisket. He tells them to get wine, and yes, he did actually say that, and get your wine and bring that to the temple where the Lord will host the banquet. Now, isn't that a cool picture? And so you would bring that to the temple, and God would host this potluck celebration that is your tithe. And you would bring all your family and your household and all this, and you would celebrate what we would celebrate Thanksgiving in the presence of God at Jerusalem. Really, really cool image. Why would he do that if he doesn't want us to celebrate the goodness of the things that he's given us? Those kinds of celebration are a glory to God. So no, that is not wrong. Sometimes we look for ways to feel guilty, do we not? Third, this is the third one. Is it wrong to enjoy God's provision? Well, no. Same reason. Those kind of overlap a little bit. But look at Ecclesiastes chapter 5, 18 to 20. Here is what I have seen to be good. It is appropriate to eat, drink, and experience good. Hear that again. It is appropriate to eat, drink, and experience good in all the labor one does under the sun during the few days of his life God has given him, because that is his reward. Maybe you don't understand why somebody else might want to go out and celebrate their raise, but God does. God does. Isn't that something? That he has given us that ability, that right, and that glory to be able to do that. But, sometimes we look like these guys, and we get a little bit snooty, and look down our nose, and no one else should be able to eat like me, that sort of a thing. So he gives us a warning. Don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. There are a lot of things that don't last here. When we are greedy, what we are greedy for will be destroyed. When we are hard-hearted toward the poor, God has every right to yank the financial rug right out from under us. Every right. When we are Scrooge, we deserve being Scrooged. Refusal to acknowledge God as the source of blessing comes up often in Scripture. At one point, he describes a man who sits down, carves an idol, cooks a steak, and then praise to his idol for all of the good that this God that he made has given him at the meal, refusing to acknowledge Jehovah God is the one who not only gave him his meal, but made the tree that he became idolatrous with. Materialism. We know that one well, don't we? Life is all about the toys. Life is all about the stuff. Life is all about the label. Life is all about, I want to get. I almost put the little picture of the birds from Finding Nemo up there. Mine. That is the American culture at the moment. Mine. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to be rich to think that way. You can be absolutely dead broke, but you see something come out and it's mine. This is not a godly attitude. And when we start treating life like it's all about gathering to ourselves, we get sick. Materialism is a sickness and an illness. Look at what it's done to the material girl, right? Madonna sang that song in the 80s. My sister, one of them, thought that was the best song ever and wanted to become a material girl, and in many ways did for a while. Then she saw through it. Madonna still hasn't. Still chasing all these things. Still chasing all that the world wants to give, and still finding it empty and hollow, to the point that you get so ill that even when you look in the mirror, you can't see what God sees. You can only see what the world tells you is wrong. So you start carving and cutting and injecting and changing till you are a cartoon of a person, right? I spared you the picture, but you know what I'm talking about. And that last one there was snobbery and arrogance. And I'm just going to say this simply. You can't be a Christian and a snob. It's impossible. They are two diametrically opposed. It's just not Jesus. So he goes on and he says in this second section of this, he says the eye is the lamp of the body. And if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. If your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. And so if the light within you is darkness, how deep is that darkness? And we look at this section like it's a little bit separate from what we've just read, but it's not. This is the section where we learn, okay, how then do I chase after the treasures of heaven? How do I build up treasures in heaven? It's not through the earning of doing good deeds. It's not like I'm going to so impress God with what I do that I'm going to get up there and he's just going to have a whole little bank account full of this stuff for me. It's not like that. So what does he mean? All right. First, let's ask this question of you. Where does your mind immediately go when you read it? If your eye is bad, it might go to, oh no, I'm looking at things that I shouldn't, or I'm seeing things that aren't appropriate for a Christian, or things like that. That certainly is true, and that certainly is included, and certainly there are things that we need to avoid. It's really not what he's talking about in this passage. And he uses this image of our eyes being healthy, and that's a specific term that they used to use, of our eyes being healthy and providing for our body the light that we need. Light often is a symbol of holiness, purity, and enlightenment. So our hearts would be enlightened. Paul uses that phrase in Ephesians. Our hearts will be enlightened when our eyes are healthy. Our hearts will be made holy and pure when our eyes are healthy. So what does it mean then for our eyes to be healthy? It's not just telling us to avoid lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, and the evil pride of life, though that's a part of it. There's something deeper going on here. So they would use this word healthy to mean a generous attitude, particularly generosity toward the poor. Now, let me ask you, have you ever read that passage and understood that Jesus was telling you to be generous to the poor? I guarantee you that's not how most preachers are preaching it, but this is what the actual Greek language in this passage actually means. If your eye is healthy, in other words, what you are looking at in the world around you is not how to get, but how to give, how to serve, and how to uplift. Then your eye is healthy. Then you're looking at the right things, and that will change you from the inside out. It brings light into your heart, into your soul, into your body, and then your whole body becomes light, holiness, purity, generosity, selflessness. If my eye is unhealthy, mine, I won't see any of those people. I won't see any of those needs. And my heart calluses and crusts over and becomes darkness. You can see now where he's going, can't you? If you're going to lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where thieves cannot break in and steal, where moth and rust cannot destroy, where things last, and where things pay eternal dividends, you got to change the way you see things. You got to change the way you see people. You got to change the way you see even your own circumstances. Maybe you don't have a lot, but maybe you could quote Peter and John and say, silver and gold I do not have, but what I have, I give you. You see, that day in the book of Acts, that day when they saw that man, they were looking with healthy eyes. And it didn't matter what they did or did not have. They were going to do something for this man in the name of Jesus. And so Peter says, in the name of Jesus of Nazareth, I tell you, get up and walk. If our eyes are healthy, we will see those moments. We will see those people. And we'll see the opportunity to bring God glory. In particular, he says, in regard to the poor and to the downtrodden. Okay? When we have bad eyes, it means our morality is out of whack. Something has gone wrong in our heart, and we're not seeing things the way that God would have us to see them. And it actually becomes a problem because then we can't even do the good. We're not going to see it. We're not going to pursue those opportunities, and we just aren't even the people and servants that we ought to be. In that last verse, in verse 24, he says, no one can serve two masters, since either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Where's the wiggle room in this? There's no wiggle room. Jesus, as he always does, brings us to a place of choice, and all of this context is together. So he says, I told you to lay up treasures in heaven, and now I'm telling you, there's only one way to do this. You can't find a middle ground. You can't say, well, I'll give to God most, but I'm not giving God all. I'm going to give to God some of myself. But no, just like the verse in that song, none of self and all of thee, that's the verse we have to get to. You don't get to stop at verse 1, 2, or 3. I have actually witnessed, we joke about it, but I've actually witnessed people not sing all the verses to that song. You can't do that. Some songs you can skip a verse, but none of self and all of thee. You know what happens when you only sing the first verse? You're still singing all of self and none of thee. It's a verse of rebellion against God and lostness. Some of us in life, we're stuck on that verse. Keep moving down the song. Make a choice. And don't be foolish when you make that choice. It has to be that we choose the Lord. I told you I like architecture. I like looking at big houses. I don't want one of these. To me, it wouldn't matter if God gave me the budget. If it requires other people to show up and help clean it, I don't want it. Okay? That's just not me. That's not who I am. I'd rather. To me, a mansion would be an Airstream. Okay, that would be it. Boy, I'd be happy, but that could be treasures on earth if I'm not careful. But here's a mansion. This is in a place called Hunts, and I just lost the name. Hunts something, Hunts Village, Hunts Town, Hunts something. But it's up in the Pacific Northwest, and it's where a lot of people like Bill Gatesy kind of people live in this neighborhood, and they have problems. I mean, you can see them, right? They have big problems, and it's almost like a Great Gatsby sort of a house. And in an article that I read from 2001, they were talking about what was their biggest nuisance, and they were very upset about it. In fact, I found a follow-up article from 2018, 17 years later. They were still upset, because they got big problems living in that big house. And for some of us, we can look at that and we can actually become guilty of judging, but we look at that and go, oh yeah, you got big problems. Which salmon piccata are we having today? But They have real problems. I mean, you can see it, right? What happens is that they have these beautiful lawns. They're next to uh, the coast, and so they're there with water and things. Back behind this mansion, is a nice, beautiful forest, and that draws in nature, and it draws in geese. How many of you like geese in your yard? Anybody? No show of hands. Some people like goose eggs. They can be handy. But these geese show up, and they'll show up sometimes 100, 200 per yard, these geese. And do you know what comes with geese? Becky, are you afraid I have a picture slide for this one? I don't, I promise you. But I could have, because there are pictures, it's the internet. But I have memory, so I don't have to do that. One of our favorite parks that we used to walk when we were first married had a goose problem. And, I don't know why they call that goofy, high-stepping military march goose stepping, because to me, goose stepping is more of a dodging sort of a game. You're really hopping around. You don't even get to walk in a straight line because they just leave their poo everywhere, right? And it's just goose poo everywhere. And geese, they leave poo like small people. It's ridiculous, and it's disgusting, and nobody wants it. You can understand why billionaires don't want goose poo all over their yards. Neither do I, and I don't need the billions to be upset about it. But this is their problem. And it's become such a problem that they've tried all different kinds of things to get rid of the goose poo because it's, quote, ruining their quality of life. Somebody just thought the same thing as me, right? If you're getting to go back inside, wiping a little goose poo off your shoe is not that big a burden, okay? But to them it is. And one of the guys in particular, still fighting the fight in 2018, is a man who decided that since these geese are not his, these geese belong to the plebs out in society, that the citizens should pay for his goose poo removal, okay? Some of these people had spent a lot of money. One lady spent $30,000 a year, $30,000 a year, which was nothing to her, but $30,000 a year for sheep dogs to bark at geese. Probably doesn't work. Some geese are not that afraid of dogs, and they can be pretty aggressive. The military sometimes uses them as guards for buildings, and good reason. They're very effective, both loud and poopy. Nobody wants to cross loud and poopy. You know what I'm saying? $30,000. Well, this guy decided the city should pay for this. All these other people who work here, they should pay for this. I'm not paying my taxes anymore. $90,000 a year in property taxes. He said, I'm not paying it. Your kids can find another way to pay for public schools. And so they took him to court, and he was fighting it out in court. I never did see the story of what got resolved, but the guy lost. You don't get to not pay your property taxes because of a goose poo here and there. Tough luck, buttercup. So now they hire people like us, right? They hire people like us with snow shovels to go and deal with the poo, which I understand can be quite significant. Each round of geese coming into his yard was leaving 28 pounds of poo. Very particular guy. He measured it. I think that's very odd, but he did. If your value of life comes down to what happens on this earth, both God and nature have a way of showing you got your worth in the wrong place. You're going to step out on your porch. You're going to step in something someday, and you're going to be reminded this isn't what it's about. And instead of looking around at the people lesser than you think, and saying, why don't they clean it up? With godly eyes, you'll say, let me help you with that. It's a whole different attitude, isn't it? But this is what happens. And over time, if we don't wake up, then something else happens. Everything just comes to ruin and decay. And then it just becomes an empty, old, broken down shell of what we thought we were worth. And we found out that glory was worth nothing. Choose carefully. You cannot worship both God and money. Choose today and choose wisely.